Isn't it strange that the more you explain, the smaller it gets? You were definitely right. You did things, you endured time, and the reasons why you felt wronged were clear. So I explained it. I tried to speak calmly at first. However, the other person tilts their head slightly. That sounds a bit like an excuse. The moment I hear those words, something hot rises from deep within my chest. No, it's not an excuse, it's the truth. I'm not trying to evade responsibility, but rather to set the record straight. But from that moment on, I start rambling on. No, that's not it. What I'm trying to say is, here is how the situation unfolded back then. At first, I tried to tell the truth. However, at some point, I started defending myself. Sentences get longer and longer. The speed of speech increases, and the other person's gaze becomes colder and colder. The more you explain, the less people listen to the content. I see your anxiety, rather than your words. I see your wavering, rather than your logic. I read your defensive attitude, before your sense of injustice. Long ago, a sage who saw the raw reality of the human heart and relationships colder than anyone else said, people do not grow bigger the more they speak. On the contrary, they can lose their own weight. And eventually, people reach this conclusion. That person talks a lot. That person is very defensive. That person doesn't take feedback well. The truth was clearly on your side, but the atmosphere was not. This is the scary thing about words. Words can be a tool to protect me, but they can also be a knife that makes me feel light. The problem doesn't end here. Once words are logged down, they do not disappear just from that spot. Those words remain on the evaluation sheet, in the boss's memory, and in the silence of colleagues. You think you explained the facts, but people remember the facial expressions and voices of that day longer. You spoke up because you felt wronged, but the other person remembers the fact that you wavered before your sense of injustice. So, this is not a skill of speaking well. It is a technique to stop the explanations that made me feel lighthearted. This scene does not happen only to special people. The more diligent a person is, the more often they experience it. It is not the person who didn't work, but rather the person who did too much who explains at length. Because that person knows the fact that no one properly saw what he had done. The sense of injustice that someone else took the void you filled for granted makes a person more anxious than expected. It feels like it will disappear if I don't speak, that it will be as if it never happened if I don't explain, and that if I remain silent, it will look like I am admitting it. So, people make the most dangerous choices. Instead of showing results, he tries to save himself with words. Min-sok said that. Min-sok really endured a lot this year. I stayed behind to review the data. Even after others had left work, I handled the suddenly changed instructions without complaint. I quietly filled in the gaps the team leader missed. I did it even though no one was watching. It is because I believed that was sincerity. However, on the day of the evaluation interview, the team leader flipped through the papers and said this: Min-sok does the work, but his initiative is a bit lacking. Min-sok froze for a moment. Lack of initiative. It was also Min-sok who created the first schedule for that project. It was also Min-sok who stayed until 11 p.m. to organize the materials. When the compilation was delayed, it was also Min-sok who contacted the client again and received the missing files. But to say the initiative is lacking? Min-sok said as calmly as possible. Team leader, may I explain that part a little? The first 1 or 2 sentences were fine. For this project, I organized the schedule first, and also double-checked the client data. It was solid up to this point. However, the team leader said, however, in my opinion, it didn't feel like it carried the overall story very well. At that moment, Min-sok's heart wavered, and the words started to increase. Actually, the direction changed a few times in the beginning. I had set a schedule initially, but the department head's instructions changed midway, so the materials were scrapped again. The assistant manager was on vacation at the time, so I checked it on their behalf. Actually, I even shared that part with you via email, but you might not have seen it. Min-sok felt he needed to explain further. It is because I felt wronged. It was because he felt that If he didn't speak about what he had done now, it would disappear forever. So I kept saying. And actually, I matched almost all of the final version as well. Of course, the manager gave the presentation, but I compiled the actual figures. I couldn't tell you separately back then, because time was too tight. But it's not like I didn't do it. As he went on, Min-suk's breathing quickened. When I stopped speaking, I felt like I had lost. However, at some point, the team leader stopped looking at the data and started looking at Min-suk's face. And he said briefly, "Min-suk, I understand. However, judging by how you are speaking now, it seems like you are taking the feedback a bit defensively." At that one word, Min-suk completely crumbled. I went in to talk about performance, but I was listening to a discussion about attitude. I tried to explain the facts, but I came across as a defensive person. I was trying to prove myself, but words were making me feel small. There is something we must see here. Min-suk wasn't wrong. The problem was the direction of the words. He was not clarifying the facts, but rather explaining his grievances. At that moment, the other person did not hear the information, but read the anxiety. Long explanations within an organization often lead to such misunderstandings. That person is trying to evade responsibility. That person can't handle criticism. That person is trying to get away with it. This evaluation may not be fair. However, in reality, a strong impression moves faster than fair words. And impressions are mostly formed by the temperature of the words, rather than their content. An explanation that cannot be stopped from rapid speech, mixed with a sense of injustice. The justifications you attach more forcefully every time the other person tilts their head. All of these combine to create an image that differs from your true feelings. Was Min-suk really that kind of person, a defensive person who can't accept feedback? No. He wasn't. He was simply afraid that what he had done would disappear. However, the moment he spoke at length, he was perceived not as a sincere person, but as an anxious one. This is the cruelty of the evaluation interview. An evaluation interview is not a place to confess everything I have done. This is a position where I must carefully plan how I will be remembered. If emotions get ahead of you in that situation, your performance will be overshadowed by your emotions. The interview will be over in 20 minutes. However, the impression formed at that time remains in the next project assignment, in the gaze of the next meeting, and in the sentences of the next evaluation. That is why you must be even more careful with your words, especially when you feel wronged. I don't mean to say that I shouldn't talk about what I did. It means I shouldn't ruin what I've done with my anxiety. The second tragedy occurs more frequently outside the company. It is a holiday family gathering. At a gathering after a long time, some serve food, some turn on the television, and some casually toss out words that pierce the heart. Does he still work at that company these days? He's getting old, so he needs to settle down now. I heard so-and-so's son already bought a house. At first, I just laugh it off. I pretend to be okay. However, when the same words are repeated, things that have been suppressed for a long time rise up inside. The family's words are especially strange. It is rude when others say it, but when family says it, it comes in under the guise of worry. That is why it hurts more. Ji-hoon tried to hold back that day as well. My uncle put down his glass and said, "You think too much. You should just get married quickly and grab a job that makes money. How long are you going to keep living such an ambiguous life?" The dining table fell silent for a moment. Ji-hoon tried to smile, but I couldn't laugh. It was said so easily to evaluate one's entire life based on just a few visible aspects, without anyone knowing how long they have endured, what responsibilities they hold at the company, or what pressure they bear every month. Ji-hoon finally opened his mouth. "Uncle, it's not that I'm living an ambiguous life. These days, staying at one job for a long time doesn't guarantee stability like it used to, so I am preparing for it in my own way. And issues like marriage or housing are not that simple either. It's not like I live without thinking." It was fine up to this point. However, my uncle said with a smile, "Oh my, you're good with words. I'm telling you, kids these days talk too much." At that moment, Ji-hoon spoke even more forcefully. "It's not that I talk too much. It's just that you speak without really knowing my situation. Do you know how I've lived until now? You don't know what I'm in charge of at the company, or what my plans are. And you shouldn't talk about someone else's life so lightly. That was true. However, the atmosphere was not on Ji-hoon's side. Some people were wary. Some drank water. And some turned up the TV volume. And someone said this: "It's a nice day, so stop it." In the end, it was the uncle who spoke rudely first. But it was Ji-hoon who made the atmosphere uncomfortable. The reason this scene is painful is not because Ji-hoon was wrong. Ji-hoon was right. However, I spoke the truth at too long on the opponent's board. If I start explaining my entire life to a rude person at that moment, I stand before the judgment seat. The other person becomes the one who asks the question, and I become the one who has to answer. The opponent poked lightly, but I bring out my entire life to defend myself. Then the weight of the relationship is reversed. My own agitation seems bigger than the other person's rudeness. This is a trap of words. We often think that if we respond to rude remarks with the right words, the other person will realize it. However, rude people do not reflect on themselves after hearing a long explanation. Rather, it slips away like this: "I was just joking. Why are you taking it so seriously? I said it because I was worried. Why are you taking it so sensitively?" In that moment, you get hurt twice. At first, I am hurt by rude remarks, and then I am hurt by being judged as a sensitive person. So you must remember, do not defend my entire life to someone who does not know it. Do not dedicate the entire context of my choices to someone who does not know the depth of my life. That person may not have intended to deeply understand you in the first place. Speaking at length in front of such a person does not convey the truth, but rather exposes myself more, and at some point, the other person remembers only your excitement, not your truth. Here comes today's classic. Baltasar Gracián is a figure who viewed the art of dealing with people with a cold and keen perspective. If we translate his philosophy of conduct into today's language, it can be said like this: the bigger the words, the lighter the person becomes, not the bigger. A truly strong person is not someone who wins by talking a lot. I am someone who speaks only as much as is necessary at the necessary moment. He does not run away in silence. However, he does not waste himself with words either. He feels wronged. However, I do not reveal my grievances to everyone. He knows how to refute. However, the moment the rebuttal drags on, you realize you have entered the opponent's game. Therefore, moderation in speech does not simply mean speaking less. It means you should refine your words. It means to make the horse your ally. Do not let words fumble on your behalf. Let words establish your center on your behalf. Now, actual standards are needed. In moments of injustice, stop within 3 sentences. The first sentence is true. The second sentence is an explanation. From the third sentence onwards, it is mostly defensive. If you need to say more, do not say it in words. Replace it with materials. Say this in the meeting room. Rather than explaining that part at length, I will summarize it with the results and data. Say this at family gatherings. It seems you viewed my situation too simply. I will stop here for now. Say this on the messenger. Rather than responding emotionally, I will provide an update after verifying the facts. These 3 sentences are not meant to prevent fighting. This is a sentence to avoid losing myself. To shorten my words means to make my words more expensive. There is a lot of cheap talk. It comes out at any time, is swept away by emotion, or is dragged out by the opponent's provocation. However, expensive words are different. It comes out slowly, briefly, and in a responsible form. Such words do not make a person feel lighthearted. Rather, it makes the space quiet. Remember 3 things starting today. First, the more unfairly treated you feel, the shorter your sentences should be. A sense of injustice is the fuel for words. If you burn that fuel, as is, your voice gets louder and your sentences get longer. However, if you compress that fuel, the horse gains weight. Short sentences are not sentences that hide emotions. It is a statement of self-control, stating that one will not be swayed by emotions. Second, if the explanation exceeds 3 sentences, please convert it into material. Please do not keep trying to resolve things verbally in meetings, interviews, or group chats. Words flow away, but the data remains. Words are misunderstood as emotions, but records create structure. If you feel truly wronged, records are even more necessary than words. Third, write factual words before emotional words. Instead of saying I feel wronged, say my scope of responsibility ends here. Rather than I feel offended, say that expression is inappropriate in a public setting. Instead of why are you doing this? Only to me, say I would like to reconfirm the work allocation criteria. I am not saying you should get rid of your emotions. Emotions are important. However, if emotions come first, the other person attacks your attitude, rather than your wounds. You must establish the facts first, and place emotions afterward. That way, your words won't fall apart. Now, do not blame yourself. It is not because you are weak that you have become talkative. It is because I didn't want to be misunderstood. It is not that you tried to explain yourself out of cowardice. It is because I didn't want to disappear. You raised your voice not only because you wanted to win against your opponent. It is because I hoped someone would understand your sincerity, even just a little. However, you must know now, sincerity is not something that can be preserved by explaining it at length. Sincerity is preserved when there is form. The form of verbal restraint, the form of recording, the form of short and solid sentences. Without that form, the words of a good person are consumed too easily. The kinder a person is, the more they talk to clear up misunderstandings. The more sincere a person is, the more they try to explain their actions in detail. The more responsible a person is, the more they try to prove that they are not someone who runs away. However, the world often does not listen to your long explanation fairly to the very end. So what you need is not more words. That is a more accurate statement. It is not a louder voice. It is heavier silence and shorter sentences. Tonight, engrave this sentence into your subconscious. I won't go into a long explanation. Spoken briefly, yet leaves a heavy impression. You are welcome to write this sentence exactly as it is in the comment section. I won't go into a long explanation. Spoken briefly, yet leaves a heavy impression. This is not a simple comment. It is a contract engraved in your brain. The next time someone misunderstands you, the next time your boss takes your efforts lightly, the next time your family judges your life easily, the next time someone in a group chat ambiguously corners you, then do not offer a long explanation like you used to. Pause for a moment. Take a deep breath and speak briefly. At that moment, you become someone who controls the words, not someone who is dragged along by them. In the previous chapter, we saw how easily a person who reveals everything about themselves too quickly is consumed. Today we have taken one step further. I learned that explaining myself too much is just as dangerous as showing too much of myself. In the next chapter, we will shorten the text and move on to what must be done. It is execution. Why do people with only hope end up doing nothing? In the next chapter, we will uncover the most dignified self-deception hidden behind the word someday. The longer I speak, the more my weight scatters. The shorter my words become, the clearer my center becomes. The next page of the book, called Your Life, will surely shine more elegantly and powerfully. This is the Mind Library.